She stepped into the station with a quiet voice and a badge no one took seriously. The officers laughed, mocked her, told her to stick to treating house pets. But behind her calm eyes was something they didn't see, something they never could have imagined. 10 minutes later, the air cracked open with the sound of helicopter blades. The building trembled, and every uniform in sight stopped and stared, as the same woman they dismissed walked out, flanked by a military squadron. Saluted, protected, feared. Because she wasn't just any civilian. But who is she really? And why did the sky open just for her? Every story brings us a little closer together. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's a joy to see how far this family of listeners reaches. The glass doors of the Seattle Police Department's Central Precinct slid open with a soft whoosh, bringing with it a gust of cool morning air. Dr. Rosalind Chen Rodriguez stepped inside, clutching her worn leather messenger bag close to her side. The weight of the evidence inside felt heavier than its physical contents would suggest. The lobby buzzed with typical morning activity, officers heading out for patrol, civilians waiting in plastic chairs, and the constant background noise of phones ringing and conversations overlapping. Rosie adjusted the volunteer badge clipped to her simple blue sweater, her fingers lingering over the words, Montana Wildlife Rescue, as if drawing strength from them. She found an empty corner near a potted plant and pulled out her tablet, needing one final review of everything she'd gathered. Her hands trembled slightly as she swiped through the photos, images that had kept her awake during the long drive from Montana. Exotic birds crammed into ventilation pipes, tiger cubs sedated in shipping crates labeled as auto parts, manifests with suspicious weight discrepancies and repetitive clerical errors that couldn't be coincidental. Just breathe, she whispered to herself, a habit picked up during her military days when the pressure threatened to overwhelm. Her gentle brown eyes closed for a moment as memories of Afghanistan flickered through her mind. Of Atlas, her German shepherd partner, alerting to hidden dangers, saving lives. Until that final day. Rosie shook her head, forcing herself back to the present. She couldn't save Atlas, but she could save these animals. The evidence was solid. She'd spent months building this case, tracking shipment patterns, following paper trails. Her background in veterinary medicine helped her spot the telltale signs of animal trafficking that others might miss. A young officer walked past, giving her badge a cursory glance. Rosie knew what they saw. A small Asian American woman in practical clothes, probably here about a lost pet or noise complaint. They couldn't see the combat medic who'd treated wounded soldiers under fire, or the Army veterinarian who'd trained elite K-9 units. That was fine. She'd learned long ago that being underestimated could be an advantage. She pulled out the shipping manifests again, her calloused fingers tracing the patterns she'd discovered. 3 months of staking out the port in the pre-dawn hours, documenting suspicious activities. The breakthrough had come last week, a shipping container that didn't match its paperwork, and the unmistakable sounds of distressed animals inside. Focus on the facts, she reminded herself, organizing her tablet and papers with military precision. The trafficking ring was clever, using multiple shell companies and rotating shipping routes. But they'd gotten sloppy recently, probably due to increasing demand. Their mistakes had left a trail, and she'd followed it all the way from Montana to Seattle's port. Rosie stood, smoothing her practical black pants and straightening her sweater. She'd chosen civilian clothes deliberately. Her old combat boots were the only hint of her military past, and most people didn't notice footwear. The less attention she drew, the better. She approached the front desk where a tired-looking sergeant was typing on his computer. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. "Excuse me, I need to report evidence of an organized crime operation." The sergeant barely glanced up. "Fill out this form, someone will contact you." "Sir," Rosie said quietly but firmly, "I have documented evidence of an international exotic animal trafficking ring operating through your port, including proof of endangered species being smuggled in shipping containers." That got his attention. He looked up, really seeing her for the first time. His eyes went to her volunteer badge, then back to her face, clearly trying to reconcile the serious accusation with her unassuming appearance. I've spent 3 months gathering evidence, she continued, pulling out her tablet. I have photos, shipping manifests with discrepancies, and documentation of suspicious patterns in port activities. She laid out her evidence with the same methodical precision she'd once used to brief military commanders. The sergeant's expression shifted from skeptical to concerned as he looked through the photos. Rosie kept her voice low but intense. These animals are suffering. Some won't survive the journey. And this is just what I've been able to document as a civilian observer. She could see the moment he realized this wasn't a typical civilian complaint. Her quiet determination and meticulously organized evidence spoke of professional investigation skills that didn't match her volunteer badge. "Wait here," he said finally, picking up his phone. "I'm going to contact someone from our Special Investigations Unit." Rosie nodded, maintaining her composed exterior while her heart raced. This was the crucial moment. Would they take her evidence seriously, or dismiss her as an overzealous volunteer? She thought of the animals suffering in those containers, of Atlas and his unwavering dedication to duty. She wouldn't let them down. She couldn't. The sergeant spoke quietly into his phone while Rosie stood at the desk, her evidence spread out before her like armor. She might look like an unlikely warrior, but she'd fought on battlefields both literal and metaphorical. This was just another front in her ongoing mission to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Officer Derek Manning strode into the lobby, his heavy footsteps announcing his presence before he even reached the desk. Behind him, Officer Jake Torres followed like an eager shadow, adjusting his utility belt with nervous energy. The sergeant gestured toward Rosie and her spread of evidence before returning to his computer, clearly washing his hands of the situation. Manning's eyes swept over Rosie with barely concealed disdain, lingering on her volunteer badge. His lips curled into a smirk. "What's this about exotic animals? We've got real crimes to deal with." "Sir, I have documented evidence of a trafficking operation," Rosie explained, maintaining her professional demeanor as she gestured to the photos and manifests. "These shipping containers are being used to smuggle endangered species through—" "Nice toy badge you've got there," Manning cut her off, picking up her volunteer ID with 2 fingers as if it might contaminate him. "Montana Wildlife Rescue? Honey, this isn't some small-town petting zoo. We're dealing with actual criminal investigations here." Torres snickered, emboldened by his partner's dismissive attitude. "Maybe stick to treating house cats? Leave the real police work to us professionals." Rosie took a deep breath, refusing to let their mockery derail her. She pulled up a particularly damning photo on her tablet. These tiger cubs were found sedated in mislabeled shipping crates. The manifests show a pattern of weight discrepancies and— "Listen, miss." Manning glanced at her ID again with exaggerated effort. "Dr. Chen Rodriguez," Rosie corrected quietly but firmly. "Whatever. You're wasting police resources with these wild theories. What's next? You gonna tell us about Bigfoot sightings?" Manning's voice dripped with sarcasm as Torres chuckled on cue. Rosie's fingers brushed against her tablet screen, pulling up more evidence. "The shipping manifests clearly show—" "You know what I see?" Manning leaned forward, his bulk intentionally intimidating as he invaded her personal space. "I see some bored volunteer playing detective probably watched too many crime shows. This isn't your jurisdiction, it's not even your state." "The animals don't care about jurisdiction lines," Rosie replied, her voice steady despite Manning's attempt to intimidate her. "They're suffering and this operation is growing. I've tracked suspicious shipments from Montana all the way to—" "That's enough." Manning slammed his hand on the desk, causing Torres to jump slightly. "You're interfering with police business. Keep pushing this, and I'll have you arrested for obstruction." "Obstruction of what?" Rosie asked, her quiet challenge cutting through his bluster. "You haven't even looked at the evidence." Manning's face reddened. "Is that backtalk? Torres, maybe our wildlife warrior here needs to cool off in a holding cell." Torres stepped forward, hand resting on his handcuffs with obvious relish. "You heard my partner, lady. Time to pack up your little animal pictures and go home." Rosie stood her ground, though every military instinct screamed at her to respond to their aggression. She kept her voice level, her hands visible and non-threatening. "I'm trying to report a serious crime. These animals are dying while being smuggled through your jurisdiction. And I'm trying to tell you that your volunteer badge doesn't give you the right to waste our time, Manning growled. We deal with real criminals, not shipping container fairy tales from some wannabe hero. Yeah, Torres added, gaining confidence from Manning's aggressive stance. Go back to Montana and play park ranger. Leave the real work to actual law enforcement. Rosie began carefully gathering her evidence, her movements deliberate and controlled. She'd faced worse intimidation in war zones, though the familiar weight of her combat gear felt very far away now. I'll document that you refuse to take my report, she said quietly. Are you threatening me? Manning stepped even closer, using his bulk to loom over her. That's it. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for interfering with… Officer Manning! A sharp voice cut through the tension. My office now. Bring the evidence and Dr. Chen Rodriguez with you. Manning's head snapped around, his face darkening as he recognized the voice. Torres quickly stepped back, his hand dropping from his handcuffs as he tried to make himself invisible. Rosie kept her expression neutral, though her heart raced with the familiar surge of adrenaline. She'd known reporting this wouldn't be easy, had expected resistance. But the level of hostility from these officers suggested something more than simple prejudice against civilian volunteers. She gathered her materials with precise movements, noting how Manning's aggressive posture had shifted to barely contained anger at being interrupted. His reaction to legitimate evidence of criminal activity seemed extreme, even for someone prejudiced against civilian involvement. It reminded her of other times she'd seen authority figures become defensive when their territory was threatened. As she followed the voice's command, Rosie caught Manning and Torres exchanging a loaded glance. Their dismissal of her evidence had been immediate and absolute, almost as if they'd been expecting someone to start asking questions about suspicious shipping containers at the port. The sharp voice calling Manning to the office echoed in Rosie's ears, triggering memories she usually kept carefully locked away. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered her evidence, not from fear of the hostile officers but from the effort of maintaining her careful facade. She'd faced far worse than 2 bullying cops during her 3 tours in Afghanistan. The weight of her volunteer badge felt strange compared to the military identification she'd once carried. Dr. Rosalind Chen Rodriguez, former captain, United States Army Veterinary Corps, attached to Special Operations K-9 units. Now she was just Rosie Chen, rural vet and animal rescue volunteer. The change of identity wasn't exactly hiding, but she preferred the quiet anonymity of her new life. As she followed Manning down the hallway, her boot heels clicked against the linoleum in a rhythm that reminded her of night patrols with Atlas. Her faithful German shepherd had been more than just a military working dog. He'd been her partner, her protector, and ultimately her greatest loss. His tag still hung around her neck, tucked beneath her civilian clothes, a constant reminder of that terrible day. The memory surfaced despite her efforts to suppress it. The scorching Afghan sun, the urgent crackle of radio calls reporting wounded soldiers, Atlas's steady presence beside her as they rushed toward the coordinates. She'd been pulling double duty that day, both as the K-9 unit handler and volunteer combat medic. Atlas had been scanning for secondary devices while she worked to stabilize a wounded Marine. The flash, the deafening explosion, the searing heat and choking dust. Rosie's fingers brushed against her tablet screen, grounding herself in the present moment. The photos of trafficked animals helped push back the memories. She had a mission now, just as vital as her military service. Every animal she saved was a small redemption for the partner she couldn't protect. Manning's dismissive attitude wasn't so different from some of the Special Forces operators she'd first worked with, before they'd learned to respect her skills. She'd earned their trust, treating their wounds under enemy fire, managing the K-9 units that kept them alive. If they could see her now, being threatened with arrest by a local beat cop. Something funny? Manning growled, noticing her slight smile. No, sir, Rosie replied automatically, her military bearing slipping through despite her best efforts. She caught herself before adding, with all due respect, a phrase that had gotten plenty of use during her tours. The familiar weight of responsibility settled across her shoulders as they approached the office. She might not wear combat boots and tactical gear anymore, but the mission remained the same: protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She'd sworn an oath as both a soldier and a veterinarian. The trafficked animals in those shipping containers were just as deserving of salvation as any wounded soldier. Atlas would have understood. He'd had an uncanny ability to sense when animals were in distress, even off-duty. During one particularly rough tour, he'd led her to an abandoned building where local children had been hiding injured strays. She'd spent her precious downtime treating those animals, with Atlas standing guard. Now her guard dog was gone, lost to an IED that had been meant for the wounded soldiers they were trying to save. The explosion had thrown her clear, but Atlas... She touched the tags beneath her shirt, feeling the familiar ridges of his name and service number pressed into the metal. The loss still ached, but it had forged her into someone stronger, someone who wouldn't back down, even when faced with hostile authority figures who underestimated her. The officers saw a soft-spoken civilian volunteer, and she let them. Better they didn't know about the combat medic who could handle herself under fire, or the special operations veterinarian who'd earned her place among elite warriors. Living under her maiden name wasn't about hiding, it was about finding peace. Montana's wide-open spaces helped quiet the hypervigilance that combat had instilled. Treating ranch animals and rescuing wildlife let her use her skills without the constant threat of violence. She'd chosen this quieter life, but that didn't mean she'd lost her edge. These officers had no idea they were dismissing someone who'd coordinated with military intelligence, someone who understood complex operations and could read the signs of organized crime. Her evidence wasn't just random photos. It was a carefully documented pattern of suspicious activities, tracked with the same precision she'd once used to document enemy movements. Manning's threatening posture, Torres's eager hostility, their reactions were excessive for a simple civilian complaint. She'd seen that kind of defensive aggression before, usually when her K9 unit got too close to something someone wanted to keep hidden. Atlas would have picked up on their tension, would have positioned himself subtly between her and the threat. But Atlas was gone, and she worked alone now. The tags against her chest reminded her of everything she'd lost, and everything she fought to protect. These trafficked animals deserved justice, and she'd find a way to help them, with or without local law enforcement cooperation. As they reached the office door, Rosie straightened her spine, channeling the quiet strength that had carried her through firefights and field surgeries. She might look like just another civilian do-gooder, but underneath she was still Captain Chen Rodriguez, decorated veteran and survivor. These officers had no idea who they were really dealing with, and for now, that was exactly how she needed it to be. Vincent Johnson stood at his office window, 40 stories above the city streets, watching container ships crawl across the harbor like water bugs. His pressed Italian suit and carefully styled silver hair reflected in the glass, creating a ghost-like double of himself against the maritime backdrop. On his polished desk, surveillance photos spread out in a messy fan, all showing a small Asian woman taking pictures around his shipping terminals. "This civilian vet," he said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of old money. "She's causing problems?" He picked up one of the photos, studying the woman's face with cold gray eyes. Officer Manning shifted uncomfortably in one of the leather guest chairs. "She showed up at the station this morning with evidence of the exotic animal shipments. Torres and I shut her down, but she's persistent." "Evidence?" Johnson's eyebrow raised slightly. "Photos of the containers shipping manifests she somehow got her hands on. Nothing concrete about the additional cargo." Manning tugged at his collar. The office's temperature was perfect, but sweat beaded on his forehead. Johnson set the photo down with deliberate care. "Show me exactly what she brought in." Manning pulled out his phone, displaying the images Rosie had tried to report. Johnson's face remained impassive as he swiped through them, but his jaw tightened at several shots showing workers loading specialized containers, the ones with hidden compartments where pure heroin nestled alongside sedated exotic animals. "The animals are a perfect cover," Johnson said, more to himself than Manning. "Customs expects the strange heat signatures, the extra weight, the special handling requirements. Who would suspect endangered species are carrying something even more valuable?" He turned back to the window, watching another container ship approach the port. "But this vet, she's gotten too close." "Want us to bring her in? We could find something to charge her with." No. Johnson's voice carried the finality of someone used to being obeyed. That would only draw attention. For now, we watch. Find out everything about her. People who interfere with my business usually have pressure points. Everyone has something to lose. Manning nodded eagerly, relieved to have clear direction. Torres is already running her background. Rosalind Chen moved here from Montana about... Full name, Johnson interrupted. I want everything, where she grew up, where she went to school, any family, friends, pets. He smiled thinly. Especially pets. Veterinarians tend to be sentimental about animals. Yes, sir, we'll get right on it. Manning stood, understanding the dismissal in Johnson's tone. After Manning left, Johnson activated his computer screen, bringing up shipping schedules and manifests. The operation had taken years to perfect. Legitimate shipping contracts provided cover for the illegal cargo. Exotic animals drew attention away from the drugs. Corrupt officials looked the other way. Every piece worked together like a fine watch. He clicked through security camera footage from his terminals, finding shots of the vet taking photos. She moved with purpose, photographing specific containers and angles. Not random at all. His eyes narrowed. This was methodical documentation, not amateur snooping. Johnson pulled up the shipping manifest she'd somehow obtained. It showed a perfectly ordinary animal transport, endangered species being moved legally between zoos. But looking closer, he noticed she'd highlighted subtle discrepancies in the weight calculations. The kind of detail most people would miss. The kind that could unravel everything if someone knew where to look. His phone buzzed. A text from Torres. Background check on Chen hitting roadblocks. Records inconsistent. Might be using alias. Johnson's fingers drummed on his desk. A civilian vet who moved like military, spotted surveillance patterns, and had a mysterious background? That changed things considerably. He pressed an intercom button. Get me everything on recent military personnel with veterinary training. Focus on special operations support, K-9 units, anyone with combat medical experience. He turned back to the harbor view, watching containers being loaded with practiced efficiency. Each one represented thousands of dollars in exotic animals, millions in drugs. The operation had made him wealthy beyond imagination, but wealth meant nothing without the power to protect it. This vet, whoever she really was, had unknowingly gathered evidence that could destroy his entire network. The photos alone showed patterns that could expose the drug shipments. The manifests she'd obtained contained weight discrepancies that could trigger deeper investigation. Even the containers she documented were the specialized ones, modified for their hidden cargo. Manning and Torres's clumsy attempts to intimidate her at the station now seemed dangerously inadequate. Their obvious hostility toward a civilian complaint might draw exactly the kind of attention he didn't want. If she was indeed military trained, their threats would only convince her something was wrong. Johnson straightened his tie, watching another container ship dock. Years of careful planning, millions in bribes and modifications, a network of corrupt officials and traffickers, all potentially at risk because one determined vet started asking questions. He wouldn't let it fall apart, not when he was so close to expanding into new territory, new products, new markets. His computer chimed with preliminary search results on military veterinarians. Time to find out exactly who was poking around his operation. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had weaknesses. It was just a matter of finding the right pressure point and squeezing until they broke. Manning hung up his phone and exchanged a meaningful look with Torres across their shared desk. Boss wants us to handle the situation, he said, his voice low. Can't let her walk out with that evidence. Torres nodded, already rising from his chair. She's still filling out forms in interview room 3. Rosie sat alone at the metal table, carefully documenting everything in triplicate. Years of military paperwork had taught her the value of detailed records. Her fingers moved steadily across the forms, but her mind raced through escape scenarios, an old habit that had kept her alive in Afghanistan. The door opened and Manning stepped in with Torres close behind. Something in their stance made her pulse quicken. Gone was the dismissive attitude from earlier, replaced by focused intensity that set off warning bells in her mind. We'll need to confiscate those materials as evidence, Manning said, reaching for her stack of photos and documents. Standard procedure. Rosie's hand stayed firmly on the papers. I'd like copies first, please. Her voice remained soft, but her grip didn't loosen. Years of treating wounded soldiers under fire had taught her to keep her tone calm even when every nerve screamed danger. That won't be necessary, Torres said, moving to block the door. In fact, we have some additional questions. You'll need to stay here while we process everything. Rosie noticed Manning's hand drifting toward his weapon, a subtle movement most civilians would miss. But she wasn't most civilians. Her muscles tensed imperceptibly, muscle memory from countless combat situations taking over. Of course, she said pleasantly, slowly standing. I just need to use the restroom first, if that's all right. Manning stepped closer, trying to intimidate her with his bulk. Sit back down, Ms. Chen. This won't take long. In one fluid motion, Rosie swept the papers into her bag while simultaneously tipping the heavy metal table. Manning stumbled backward as Torres lunged forward, but Rosie was already moving, her actions precise and economical. No wasted energy, no hesitation. She ducked under Torres's grab, using his momentum against him just as she'd been trained. He crashed into Manning, and both officers went down in a tangle of limbs. Rosie was through the door before they could recover, moving with the quick, controlled pace of someone who knew running only drew attention. Stop her! Manning's shout echoed through the hallway. Rosie turned left, then right, navigating the station's corridors with tactical precision. She kept her movements smooth, blending in with the busy station's normal traffic. A young officer stepped into her path, reaching for her arm. Without breaking stride, she used a simple redirection technique learned in close-quarters combat training, leaving him grasping empty air as she passed. Manning's voice crackled over the station's radio system. All units detain Rosalind Chen, Asian female, 5'4", last seen heading toward the east exit. She changed direction immediately, heading west instead. Through the windows, she could see patrol cars starting to circle the building. The main exits would be watched now. Her mind raced through alternatives, remembering the building layout she'd instinctively noted upon entering, another habit from her military days. The evidence in her bag felt heavy, but she couldn't let it go. Those photos and documents were her only proof of the trafficking operation. More importantly, they were her only chance to save those animals. The memory of Atlas, loyal until his last breath, pushed her forward. She heard Manning behind her, his footsteps heavy and fast. "Where is she?" he barked into his radio. "Johnson wants her stopped." The name confirmation sent a chill through her. Her suspicions about corruption had been right. These officers were working for the trafficking ring. This wasn't just about saving animals anymore. She was uncovering something much bigger and more dangerous. Rosie spotted a maintenance door and slipped through, finding herself in a narrow utility corridor. The sound of Manning's voice grew fainter as she navigated the building's service areas, drawing on years of experience moving quietly through hostile territory. She emerged in the parking garage, keeping close to the support columns. A police cruiser rolled past, its occupants scanning for someone running, not the calm woman walking purposefully toward the exit. She pulled out her phone, pretending to text while watching the patrol patterns in the garage. When the moment was right, she walked out onto the street, matching her pace to the afternoon crowd. Behind her, she could hear Manning's frustrated voice. "How did we lose her?" "She's just some vet." Rosie allowed herself a small smile, remembering all the times enemies had underestimated her in Afghanistan. She merged into a group of office workers crossing the street, her movements relaxed and natural despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Only when she was several blocks away did she duck into a coffee shop, choosing a seat that let her watch both the entrance and the street. She pulled out her phone again, this time making a real call. "Hey, it's me," she said quietly. "Those shipping manifests I found? They're connected to something bigger. The police are involved." She paused, listening to the response. "Yes, I'm safe. But we need to be careful now. They know I have evidence and they'll be looking for me." She ended the call and sat back, mind already working on next steps. The casual dismissal she'd faced at the station had turned into active pursuit. She'd escaped this time, but she knew from experience that people like Johnson wouldn't stop looking. Her military training had kept her alive today. Now she needed to figure out how to use it to expose the truth. Rosie's hotel room window offered a clear view of the street below. She stood to the side of the glass, careful to remain hidden behind the curtain as she scanned the area. 3 men had been watching the building for the past hour, one in a parked sedan across the street, another pretending to read a newspaper at the bus stop, and a third who kept walking past the hotel entrance every 15 minutes. Her military training kicked in automatically as she noted their positions and patterns. These weren't random people. Their movements were too coordinated, too precise. They maintained clear lines of sight to all exits, including the service entrance she'd spotted earlier. She moved away from the window and checked her phone again. No signal. She'd tried calling the FBI field office twice, but each call had dropped mysteriously. The state police line had gone dead mid-conversation. Someone was actively blocking her communications. The laptop on the desk showed similar issues. Every attempt to send emails about the trafficking evidence had failed. The hotel's Wi-Fi had become suspiciously unreliable, and her cellular data connection kept cutting out. They were isolating her just like they'd done to targets in Afghanistan. Rosie took a deep breath and touched the thumb drive in her pocket. The evidence was safely backed up, but that wouldn't matter if she couldn't get it to the right people. She'd seen enough combat situations to know when she was being boxed in. A knock at her door made her freeze. "Housekeeping," a female voice called. Rosie stayed silent. She'd already placed the "Do Not Disturb" sign outside. This was another surveillance tactic, checking if she was still in the room. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in a hotel uniform, but the way she held herself was wrong. Her stance was too alert, too ready for action. Moving silently, Rosie gathered her essential gear into a small backpack, evidence, laptop, and the few supplies she'd brought from Montana. The rest could be left behind. She'd learned in Afghanistan to travel light and be ready to move at a moment's notice. Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "Doctor. Chen Rodriguez, let's discuss your concerns about our shipping operation. Mr. Johnson would like to meet." They knew her real name. Manning must have run a deeper background check after she escaped the police station. Her cover as a simple civilian veterinarian was blown. Another knock, harder this time. "Ms. Chen, hotel management. We need to discuss an issue with your room." Rosie moved to the bathroom, closing the door quietly. The small window there was barely big enough to squeeze through, but it would have to do. She'd mapped this escape route the moment she checked in, another habit from her military days that was proving useful again. She heard the main door open. They had a key. Multiple sets of footsteps entered the room. Professional, coordinated movement. These weren't hotel staff. "Clear," a male voice said quietly. "Bathroom?" Rosie was already through the window, hanging from the ledge. 3 stories up, but there was a narrow maintenance platform 2 floors below. She waited until she heard them approach the bathroom door, then let herself drop. Her feet hit the platform with practiced silence. Years of combat training took over as she quickly made her way down the metal ladder to street level, staying close to the wall to minimize her visibility. But they'd planned for this. As soon as she reached the ground, she spotted 2 more men moving toward her position. They wore casual clothes, but moved with the unmistakable precision of trained operatives. Rosie walked calmly toward the busy street, fighting the urge to run. Running attracted attention. Instead, she matched the pace of other pedestrians, just another woman out shopping as she clutched her backpack. Her phone vibrated again. Another text. "You're only making this harder on yourself, Doctor. We have the building surrounded." She deleted the message and kept walking, her mind racing through options. The bus stop was watched. The nearby subway entrance would be covered. They'd have people at the taxi stands too. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up alongside her. The back door opened. "Get in, Doctor," a man's voice said firmly. "Mr. Johnson is waiting." Rosie turned sharply into a coffee shop, weaving between tables toward the back exit she'd noticed earlier. Behind her, she heard the quick footsteps of men trying to follow without causing a scene. The back door led to a service alley. She turned left, then right, using the dense urban landscape to break their sight lines. But more vehicles were appearing, black SUVs and unmarked vans, all with tinted windows. They were hurting her using standard tactical containment procedures to limit her options. She ducked into a department store, taking the escalator up while watching the reflections in the store's security mirrors. At least 6 men had followed her in, spreading out to cover the exits. Her phone vibrated one final time. "End of the line, doctor. Don't make this messy." Rosie looked around the store's second floor. They were right. She was running out of options. The armed men were closing in, professional and methodical. This wasn't about bureaucratic obstruction anymore. These people meant to silence her permanently. She backed away from the escalator, watching as Johnson's men began to converge on her position. Their jackets bulged slightly, concealed weapons. The store's other customers were starting to notice something was wrong, creating a ripple of unease through the shopping floor. Rosie felt the weight of the evidence in her backpack, all those animals suffering in cramped containers used as unwitting drug mules. She thought of Atlas, who had died trying to save others. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter the odds. The men were getting closer, their movements becoming more focused as they spotted her. She could see their hands moving toward their concealed weapons. Time had run out. The first shot shattered the department store's window behind Rosie. Glass rained down as shoppers screamed and scattered. Johnson's men had abandoned subtlety. They were shooting to kill. Rosie dove behind a clothing rack as more bullets tore through the air. Her military training took over completely. She counted 6 attackers, all armed with suppressed handguns. They were spreading out, using standard tactical formation to cut off her escape routes. "Clear the civilians," one of them shouted. The remaining shoppers fled toward the exits, leaving Rosie alone with her pursuers. She moved low and fast between the aisles, using the store's layout for cover. A display of handbags exploded next to her head. 2 shooters on her left, 3 moving to flank from the right. The 6th was heading for the escalator to cut off her retreat. Rosie grabbed a heavy metal rack and hurled it toward the nearest attacker. He stumbled, his shot going wide. She closed the distance in 3 quick steps, striking his weapon hand with a precise blow that sent the gun clattering across the floor. Before he could recover, she drove her knee into his solar plexus and twisted his arm behind his back, using him as a human shield. More bullets whizzed past as she backed toward the service corridor. Her shield struggled and cursed, but she kept the pressure on his arm joint. "Stay still if you want to keep this arm," she whispered. The years of combat experience flowed through her movements. Each step calculated, each action precise. The service corridor led to a maintenance stairwell. Rosie released her human shield with a final joint lock that left him groaning on the floor. She took the stairs 3 at a time, hearing her pursuers coordinating through radio earpieces below. "She's heading up, block the roof access." The stairwell door burst open 2 floors below. Rosie pressed herself against the wall as bullets sparked off the metal railing. They were hurting her upward, trying to trap her on the roof. It was a solid tactical move, one she'd used herself in urban combat situations. She reached the roof access door and shouldered through it into the bright daylight. The hotel's roof was a maze of ventilation units and satellite dishes, perfect for cover, but also perfect for an ambush. A bullet pinged off the metal doorframe inches from her head. 3 of Johnson's men had already reached the roof from another access point. They moved with military precision, spreading out to surround her. "It's over, Doctor," one called out. "Just give us the evidence and this can end quickly." Rosie ducked behind an air conditioning unit, checking her options. The adjacent building was too far to jump. The fire escape was on the far side, covered by 2 of the gunmen. The 3rd was moving to cut off her path back to the stairwell. She touched the thumb drive in her pocket. All those animals suffering in Johnson's shipping containers. All the evidence that could bring down his entire operation. She thought of Atlas, her loyal partner who had died trying to save others. Some things were worth dying for. "Last chance," the leader shouted. "Come out now." Rosie analyzed their positions through the gaps between equipment. They were good, maintaining overlapping fields of fire, watching all angles. But they'd made one mistake. They assumed she was trapped, desperate. They didn't expect her to attack. She grabbed a loose piece of pipe and hurled it toward the fire escape. The clatter drew instant fire from all 3 men. In that split second of distraction, she burst from cover, closing the distance to the nearest shooter. Her first strike knocked his gun away. The second dropped him to his knees. but the other two were already turning, weapons raised. Rosie spun her captured opponent between herself and their guns. "Drop them," she commanded, applying pressure to his throat. "Now!" "Shoot her!" the man gasped. "Take the shot!" The other two gunmen held their aim steady, professional killers, weighing their options. Rosie recognized their stance, their cold calculation. They would sacrifice their teammate to complete the mission. "Last warning," the leader said, "the evidence now." Rosie was out of options. 3 guns pointed at her, more men certainly coming up the stairs behind her. Her combat skills had gotten her this far, but she was outnumbered and outgunned. The roof offered no escape routes, no tactical advantages she hadn't already tried. She kept her grip firm on her human shield, mind racing through scenarios. Each possibility ended the same way, with her dead and the evidence in Johnson's hands. All those animals would continue suffering. Her failure would doom them to more abuse. The roof access door banged open behind her. More of Johnson's men spilled out, weapons ready. They moved to surround her in a tight semicircle of gun barrels. "It's done, Doctor," the leader said. "You fought well, but it's over. Give us the drive." Rosie felt the weight of the evidence in her pocket. The photos of trapped exotic animals. The shipping manifests proving Johnson's drug operation. Everything needed to bring down his entire criminal empire. But surrounded by armed killers on this rooftop, her military training could only take her so far. She held her captured gunmen tighter as the circle of weapons closed in. The morning sun cast their shadows long across the roof, a dozen armed men against one former army vet who'd only wanted to save some animals. Her options had run out. This was the darkest moment, trapped on a rooftop with nowhere left to run. Rosie's hand brushed against the small device in her back pocket, the military-issue emergency beacon she'd never been able to throw away. For 5 years, she'd carried it as a reminder of Atlas and the life she'd left behind. The smooth metal felt warm against her fingers as memories flooded back. The circle of armed men tightened around her. Their boots crunched on loose gravel as they moved with practiced coordination. Her captured gunmen struggled weakly in her grip, but she barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, back in the dusty streets of Afghanistan, watching Atlas bound ahead to check for IEDs, his tail wagging as he worked. "Final warning," the leader called out. "Release him and hand over the evidence." Rosie's throat tightened. She'd spent years running from her military past, trying to atone for Atlas's death through quiet civilian work. The beacon represented everything she'd been avoiding: the connections, the responsibility, the pain of losing those you counted on. Using it meant admitting she couldn't handle this alone. Another gunman edged closer, weapon trained on her head. "Boss wants this done clean. Don't make it messy." Her fingers closed around the beacon. Atlas had died because she'd tried to save everyone by herself that day. Her stubborn independence had cost her partner his life. Now, more lives were at stake, not just hers, but countless animals trapped in Johnson's shipping containers. 10 seconds, the leader announced. "Then we shoot through him to get to you." Rosie's captured gunmen tensed. They all knew it wasn't a bluff. With trembling fingers, she pulled out the beacon. The familiar weight settled in her palm as memories crashed over her. Atlas's warm fur, his excited barks, his final whimper as the IED exploded. She'd been too proud to call for backup then, too convinced she could handle everything alone. 5 seconds. The morning sun glinted off the beacon's activation switch. Using it meant accepting help, meant acknowledging she was still connected to that world she'd tried to leave behind, meant facing the guilt and grief she'd been running from. 3. Rosie closed her eyes. She saw Atlas's trusting face, felt his loyal presence beside her. He'd never hesitated to ask for her help when he needed it. Their partnership had been built on mutual trust and support. 2. Her thumb pressed the switch. The beacon hummed to life, its signal reaching out to military channels she hadn't accessed in years. The weight of isolation lifted slightly from her shoulders as the device pulsed in her hand. 1! Wait, she called out, voice steady despite her racing heart. You might want to consider what's about to happen. The leader's eyes narrowed as he noticed the beacon. What is that? Emergency signal, Rosie said. "Military channels. My real name is Dr. Rosalind Chen Rodriguez. 3 tours in Afghanistan with elite K-9 units. The cavalry's coming, gentlemen." Several gunmen shifted uneasily, but the leader laughed. "Nice try. Even if that's true, help's too far away to save you. This ends now." Rosie tightened her grip on her human shield. The beacon pulsed steadily in her hand, each beat carrying her signal further. She had no idea if anyone would respond, or if they'd arrive in time. But for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't facing danger alone. "Atlas," she whispered, too softly for anyone else to hear. "I finally learned to ask for help, boy. A little late, but I learned." The gunmen raised their weapons. The leader stepped forward, finger tightening on the trigger. Rosie stood tall, beacon broadcasting steadily. She might not survive the next few minutes, but she'd finally stopped running from her past. The signal would lead others to Johnson's operation, even if she didn't live to see it taken down. The leader's finger moved to the trigger. "Goodbye, Doctor." Rosie held the beacon high, its rhythmic pulse matching her heartbeat. Help might be impossibly far away, but she was no longer alone. After 5 years of isolation and guilt, she'd taken the hardest step, reaching out, accepting that sometimes even the strongest warriors need backup. The morning sun cast long shadows across the roof as the gunmen prepared to fire. Rosie clutched the beacon like a lifeline, its steady signal reaching out into the distance. She'd finally learned Atlas's last lesson, that true strength sometimes means admitting you can't do everything alone. In a secure military operations center hundreds of miles away, Colonel Patricia Hayes stood before a wall of monitors displaying surveillance data. Her attention snapped to a flashing alert on her command console, an emergency beacon activation she hadn't seen in 5 years. "Ma'am," a communications officer called out, "we're picking up a priority signal from the Port City sector. Military issue beacon, authenticated to..." He paused, double-checking the identification code. "Dr. Rosalind Chen Rodriguez." Hayes straightened, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Rosie," she whispered. The name brought back memories of a dedicated officer who'd saved countless lives, both human and canine, during her tours in Afghanistan. Hayes had lost track of her after the IED incident that killed Atlas. "Pull up everything we have on that location," Hayes ordered, her commanding voice carrying across the operations center. Staff members rushed to comply, fingers flying across keyboards as data streamed onto the main screens. "Beacon location overlays directly with our surveillance of Vincent Johnson's operation," an analyst reported. "Signals coming from the roof of the Marina Bay Hotel." Hayes moved closer to the displays, studying the tactical overlay. For months, her Animal Crimes Task Force had been building a case against Johnson's smuggling network. They'd traced shipments of exotic animals to terrorist cells overseas, where the creatures were being used in biological weapons research, but they'd never managed to gather enough evidence for a takedown. "Show me all surveillance photos from that sector over the past 48 hours, Hayes commanded. New images filled the screens, including shots of a petite Asian American woman photographing shipping containers at the port. "That's her," Hayes said, pointing to the image. "Rosie's been documenting their operation without even knowing what she'd stumbled into." She turned to her tactical officer. "What assets do we have in range?" "2 Black Hawk squadrons running training exercises 50 miles out. We can have them on site in 20 minutes. Hayes nodded sharply. "Get them airborne. Now." She grabbed her tactical vest from a nearby rack, checking her sidearm as her team scrambled to mobilize. "Alert local law enforcement that we're declaring federal jurisdiction, and someone get me a secure line to the Port Authority." As her staff coordinated the response, Hayes studied another screen showing thermal images of the hotel roof. Multiple armed figures surrounded a single heat signature she knew had to be Rosie. Time was critical. "Ma'am," her intelligence officer called out, "we're receiving a data upload from Dr. Chen Rodriguez's phone. Dozens of high-resolution photos of shipping manifests, container numbers, and exotic animals in transit. This matches perfectly with our ongoing investigation." Hayes reviewed the incoming evidence with growing satisfaction. "This is it, the missing piece we needed. Those shipping records prove the connection between Johnson's animal trafficking and the terrorist cells. She turned to address the entire operations center. People, this is now a priority 1 tactical intervention. We're not just saving one of our own. We're shutting down an international terrorist supply chain. The operations center erupted into focused activity as Hayes strode toward the helipad, her tactical team falling in behind her. The distinctive whump-whump of helicopter rotors filled the air as 2 Blackhawks touched down for immediate deployment. Team 1 will secure the hotel roof, Hayes briefed her squad as they jogged to the waiting aircraft. Team 2 hits the port facility simultaneously. No one gets away, no evidence gets destroyed. She checked her watch. Rosie's been holding out up there for 10 minutes already. Let's make sure she doesn't have to hold out much longer. As Hayes buckled into her seat, she allowed herself a grim smile. Rosie had always been one of her best, brilliant, dedicated, and far tougher than anyone suspected. Even after leaving the service, she'd managed to crack a case that had frustrated federal authorities for months. The helicopters lifted off, banking sharply toward the port city. Hayes watched the ground blur below them as she thought about the young officer she'd lost track of after Atlas's death. Rosie had blamed herself, retreating into civilian life rather than facing her grief. But she'd never stopped serving, never stopped fighting for those who couldn't protect themselves. 5 years, Hayes murmured, too softly for anyone else to hear over the rotor noise. 5 years running from who you really are, Rosie, but you finally called for backup. The tactical radio crackled with updates as multiple agencies coordinated their response. Hayes's evidence teams were already moving to secure Johnson's offices and warehouses. The net was closing, thanks to one determined veterinarian who refused to look the other way. 10 minutes to target, the pilot announced. Hayes checked her weapon one final time. Hang on, Rosie, she said. The cavalry's almost there. She smiled again, fiercer this time. And we're bringing one hell of a case file with us. The thundering approach of military helicopters shattered the tense standoff on the hotel roof. 2 Blackhawks emerged from behind nearby buildings, their spotlights cutting through the darkness to illuminate the scene. The smugglers squinted against the sudden glare, their weapons wavering as the helicopters held position on either side of the building. Rosie felt the familiar rush of air from the rotors, a sensation that brought her right back to countless missions in Afghanistan. The lead helicopter's side door slid open, revealing a tactical team in full gear. At their center stood Colonel Patricia Hayes, exactly as Rosie remembered her, tall, commanding, and radiating authority. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," Hayes's voice boomed through a megaphone, amplified above the rotor wash. "The building is surrounded. You have 3 seconds to comply." The smugglers, caught in the crosshairs of multiple laser sights, slowly lowered their guns. Tactical teams rappelled down from both helicopters, securing the suspects with practiced efficiency. Rosie watched the scene unfold, her heart pounding with relief and something else. Pride, maybe, or the recognition of finally facing her past. Down in the street, Officers Manning and Torres had responded to reports of the military operation at the hotel. They stood beside their patrol car, faces frozen in disbelief as they watched the scene unfold above them. Their expressions shifted from confusion to dawning horror as they recognized the implications. "All suspects secured, Colonel," a tactical officer reported through the radio. Hayes nodded and turned to Rosie, snapping off a crisp salute that Rosie automatically returned. "Dr. Chen Rodriguez," Hayes said warmly, using Rosie's full married name. "It's been too long." She gestured to the evidence bag containing Rosie's phone and camera. "Your documentation of Johnson's operation was exactly what we needed. You just helped us crack a case with international terrorism implications." Manning and Torres edged closer to the hotel entrance, trying to hear the exchange. Their jaws dropped as they watched military personnel treating the civilian veterinarian with obvious respect and deference. Hayes turned to address the gathering crowd of local law enforcement and media. Dr. Chen Rodriguez served 3 tours in Afghanistan as both a military veterinarian and volunteer combat medic with our elite K-9 units. Her actions under fire saved dozens of soldiers' lives while managing critical K-9 operations in hostile territory. Rosie felt her cheeks flush at the public recognition. She'd spent so long running from her military past, but here was Hayes, bringing it into the light. Even after leaving active duty, Hayes continued, her voice carrying clearly to the stunned officers below. She never stopped serving. Her civilian work exposed a criminal network that was supplying exotic animals to terrorist organizations for biological weapons research. Manning's face had turned an unhealthy shade of gray. He watched as federal agents began leading away suspects, knowing it was only a matter of time before his own corruption came to light. Beside him, Torres couldn't stop staring at the woman they'd dismissed so completely just hours before. Hayes turned back to Rosie, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We need people like you, Rosie. People who see what others miss, who fight for those who can't defend themselves, human or animal." She paused, meeting Rosie's eyes. "I'm heading up a new division of the Animal Crimes Task Force, combining military and civilian operations to stop these kinds of networks worldwide. We could use your expertise." Rosie felt tears threatening to spill. For 5 years, she'd hidden from her military family, buried herself in civilian work, tried to atone for Atlas's death alone. But standing here, surrounded by the familiar discipline and purpose of a military operation, she felt something healing inside her. "Your partner would be proud of you," Hayes said softly, knowing exactly what Rosie was thinking. "Atlas didn't die because you failed him. He died doing exactly what you both trained for, protecting others." The tears fell freely now as Rosie nodded, accepting the truth of Hayes's words. Below them, federal agents were approaching Manning and Torres, their expressions grim. The officers' dismissive mockery had transformed into stark fear as their connection to Johnson's operation began to unravel. "What do you say, Doctor?" Hayes asked, extending her hand. "Ready to get back in the fight? This time, we'll be saving animals and stopping terrorists. Seems like a perfect fit for your skill set." Rosie looked at the offered hand, then at the efficient military operation around her, the helicopters, the tactical teams, the sense of purpose and belonging she'd been missing for so long. She thought of all the animals still in danger, all the criminal networks still operating in shadows. She grasped Hayes's hand firmly. "Yes, Colonel. I'm ready." The sun was rising over the port as the last suspects were led away. Manning and Torres, now in handcuffs, watched as Rosie descended from the roof surrounded by respectful military personnel. The woman they'd threatened to arrest for interfering with police business now stood tall in her true identity. Decorated veteran, skilled tactician, and protector of both animals and national security. The raid on Johnson's warehouse complex moved with military precision. Rosie advanced alongside the tactical team, her veterinary kit slung across her back. The familiar weight of body armor and radio equipment brought muscle memories flooding back from her tours in Afghanistan. Multiple heat signatures detected in the East Wing, Hayes's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Dr. Chen Rodriguez, that's likely where they're keeping the animals. Alpha Team, secure the main office. Beta Team, escort the doctor." Rosie moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors, guided by the tactical team. The sound of frightened animals grew louder as they approached the storage area. When they breached the door, the sight inside made her heart clench. Dozens of shipping containers lined the walls, each one housing terrified exotic creatures in cramped conditions. "I need immediate medical support and transport units," Rosie called into her radio, already moving toward the nearest container. Inside, a sedated tiger lay breathing shallowly. Her trained eye noted the signs of dehydration and drug abuse. "We've got at least 3 dozen critical cases here." As her team worked to secure the area, gunfire erupted from the main office. Through her earpiece, she heard Hayes coordinating the takedown of Johnson and his men. Rosie focused on triaging the animals, her hands steady as she administered emergency treatment to those in worst condition. A sudden movement caught her eye. One of Johnson's men, previously hidden behind a stack of crates, lunged toward her with a knife. Before the tactical team could respond, Rosie executed a perfect defensive maneuver, using his momentum against him. The smuggler crashed into a metal container and crumpled to the ground. But something was wrong. The man wasn't moving and a growing pool of blood spread beneath him. Without hesitation, Rosie dropped beside him, combat medic instincts taking over. "Man down, possible arterial bleed," she called out, already pulling medical supplies from her kit. The same hands that had defended against his attack now worked to save his life. She identified the severed artery where he'd struck the container's sharp edge and applied pressure while starting an IV line. The smuggler's eyes flickered open, recognition and confusion mixing in his gaze as he realized his would-be victim was fighting to keep him alive. "Stay with me," Rosie commanded, her voice firm and professional. "Medical support is 2 minutes out." She continued working, using every skill learned in battlefield medicine to stabilize him until help arrived. Across the complex, Hayes' team had cornered Johnson in his office. Manning and Torres, attempting to warn him, had walked right into the arms of federal agents. Their fellow officers watched in disgust as the corrupt cops were led away in handcuffs, their badges removed. "You don't understand," Manning protested as his former colleagues stared him down. "She was just some civilian veterinarian sticking her nose where it didn't belong." "That civilian is a decorated combat veteran who just helped us break an international terrorism case," Hayes replied coldly. "While you were taking bribes to look the other way, she was risking her life to save others, both human and animal." The emergency medical team arrived at Rosie's location, taking over care of the injured smuggler. "Pressure's stabilizing," one paramedic reported. "Quick thinking with that arterial clamp, doctor. You saved his life." Rosie stood up, her uniform covered in blood, and surveyed the warehouse. Animal transport units were arriving, staffed with veterinary specialists she'd called in from local shelters. Together, they began the delicate process of assessing and relocating the endangered animals. "All targets secured," Hayes announced over the radio. "Johnson and his entire network are in custody. Dr. Chen Rodriguez, what's the status of the animals?" 37 exotic animals recovered, Rosie reported, watching as her fellow veterinarians worked to safely sedate and transport the creatures. 8 critical but stable. The rest will need rehabilitation, but they'll survive. She paused, looking at the smuggler being loaded into an ambulance. "No casualties, human or animal." Hayes' voice softened with pride. "Wouldn't expect anything less from you, doctor. You haven't lost your touch, as a soldier or a healer." A week after the raid, Rosie stood in Colonel Hayes' office at the military base, still processing the offer laid out before her. "We're creating a specialized unit," Hayes explained, sliding a folder across her desk. "The Animal Crimes Joint Task Force, combining military precision with civilian expertise to combat international wildlife trafficking. And I want you to lead it." Rosie picked up the folder, her fingers tracing the official insignia. "A permanent position, not just consulting?" "Full leadership role. You'll have both military and civilian resources at your disposal. Your unique background makes you perfect for this. You understand both worlds." Hayes leaned forward, her expression earnest. "The Johnson case proved how these trafficking operations often connect to larger threats. We need someone who can see the bigger picture while never losing sight of the animals we're protecting." Sunlight streamed through the office windows as Rosie considered the proposal. For years, she'd tried to distance herself from her military past, believing that moving forward meant leaving it behind. But now she understood. True healing meant embracing all parts of herself. "There's something else you should see," Hayes said, standing up. "Follow me." They walked to the base's temporary animal shelter where the rescued animals from Johnson's operation were being treated. In one of the rehabilitation areas, a young German shepherd watched them intently through the fence. "He was one of the smuggled puppies," Hayes explained. "About 8 months old. Our vet team nursed him back to health, but he needs special training. Reminds me of another shepherd I once knew." Rosie's breath caught as the puppy's brown eyes met hers. They held the same intelligent, determined look she remembered in Atlas. The young dog tilted his head, studying her with curious intensity. "He's got potential," Hayes continued, "but he needs someone who understands both military discipline and gentle rehabilitation. Someone who can help him become what he's meant to be." Rosie knelt by the fence, extending her hand. The shepherd approached cautiously, sniffed her fingers, then pressed his nose against her palm. Something shifted in Rosie's heart. A door she'd kept locked since losing Atlas slowly began to open. "Phoenix," she whispered, the name coming to her naturally. His name is Phoenix. Hayes smiled knowingly. Rising from the ashes to begin again? Both of us are, Rosie replied, watching as Phoenix wagged his tail, responding to his new name. The adoption paperwork was completed that afternoon. As Rosie led Phoenix to her car, she felt the weight of her grief finally lifting. She wasn't betraying Atlas's memory by loving another dog. She was honoring it by continuing their mission to protect and serve. Over the next few weeks, Rosie and Phoenix settled into their new routine. Morning training sessions at the base blended military commands with playful bonding. Phoenix proved to be a quick learner, eager to please and naturally protective. His presence helped Rosie fully embrace her new role, bridging her civilian and military lives. "Ready for another day?" Rosie asked one morning, watching Phoenix sit alertly beside her desk at the task force headquarters. His tail wagged as she clipped on his special service vest. On his collar, a new tag gleamed: Phoenix, Animal Crimes Joint Task Force. Rosie touched the silver pendant she wore, Atlas's old tag, now a reminder rather than a burden. She was no longer running from her past or hiding who she was. With Phoenix at her side and her new team behind her, she had found her true calling: protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Together, they walked into the morning sunlight, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. Phoenix matched her stride perfectly, both of them moving with shared purpose and renewed hope. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.